Where do I begin? What made this moment at all possible? How did a series of chances lead to schools for girls, including one in her village? Over the next few minutes, a story of two worlds will emerge, one familiar, one perhaps less so. The majority in these images access to the most basic needs and hover around the poverty line. They endure a hand-to-mouth existence day to day, year after year. This is their reality. These are their portraits. Before the age of 10, I lived in Nicaragua, followed by Lebanon. Had seen some of these faces, perhaps planting the seed for this work as a child. Since the age of 10, I grew up in the States. I graduated as a dentist from a local university and have practiced since that time as a prosthodontist in the area. Then came that first chance almost 20 years ago, which gave me a peek into a different world. During my past visits to Lebanon, I'd always noticed migrants and felt moved by their circumstances as economic refugees from Syria. They worked 12 hours a day under the sun just for a meal, and I was curious. One day I decided to take a chance, hailed a taxi, and headed to a cluster of tents just outside the town. This was the first chance in a series of chances, and it paid off. They offered tea to me and themselves to the camera. I returned to my graduate studies and processed the film. As the faces emerged through the chemicals, I was blown away by their honesty, their integrity, their beauty, their strength, and their love. This was the place I wanted to be, and photography was my passport. A few years later, a friend familiar with my work invited me to Cuba. We walked, exploring the neighborhoods of Havana, and exposed a few dozen rolls of film, mainly street portraits as you see. 11 visits and 10 years later, photographs of those same families are still being made. The single photograph has been transformed into collaboration through the years, based on input from everyone involved, not just the photographer. Rather than making a single image, we gather the families and take them to the beach, for example, where we create for 1 hour and then just relax and enjoy the rest of the afternoon with the families under the sun. This was also a place I needed to be, except this was more than a place and more than a country. This was that other world, different from mine back home. In between these trips, I returned home and lived like any other, except that I was changing. And the line between those two worlds was disappearing. Then another chance encounter at a local Ethiopian restaurant led me to that incredible land and my present project of documenting 24 tribes in Africa. We slept wherever we could, drove endlessly over some of the roughest roads just to get to some of these communities. This, however, was my most difficult experience and took a toll on me physically. After a week of being unable to keep anything down, actually, my friends took me to a local hospital. Incredible doctor finished his examination and gave me a prescription, which was right here, and it cost less than a meal next door. He refused payment of any kind and just wished us well. The very next morning, I successfully had my first meal, and it was a day after this footage. Because these portraits at times lack details in the background, it's difficult sometimes to ascertain the circumstances behind the making of these images. However difficult these circumstances may be, they pale in comparison to their circumstances. from child labor to prostitution to refugees of unimaginable suffering. These are the faces of that unseen other half. Up until this moment, countless rolls of films were taken and prints handed to the people photographed. This was all about to change. Another encounter when 3 friends invited me to document 3 foundations working in India. One afternoon, after working in a market, a friend asked this question of me: how will your photographs help these people? I heard that question oftentimes in my past, and my answer was almost a reflex, and thus did very little to change the expression on his face. I knew what he wanted to hear. And this was the moment of illumination for me. In a dimly lit room in Old Delhi, that the purpose of my work was revealed to me, using these images to raise awareness and funding for these very people. This was once again the moment for me. After a decade of exploration and chance. Since then, it has been my mission to present their stories through these images. Solely through benefits featuring these images, these photographs, 6 schools for girls have begun in Haryana and Rajasthan, India. The very girls that you see right now on this screen now sit for classes for 3 hours a day under the supervision of young women from their very ranks in their communities. They see with their own eyes in front of them examples of incredibly strong women rising above their circumstances and helping make that change in their communities. The villages are filled with the voices of these students reciting their lessons, of chalk striking chalkboards with fervor and joy and enthusiasm. When I began this work almost 2 decades ago, schools for girls was a thought in the distance. What this work has taught me is that if we put ourselves out there with honest intent, the world will embrace us, and the lives of everyone will be enriched. My hope is that their stories will inspire you as they have inspired me. For those of us still searching for our purpose, to look at our seemingly chaotic lives at times and seize the moment when chance shows her face to us. The right to dream belongs to every one of these individuals. And these 6 schools are just the beginning.